Hello everyone, welcome to Ruined Board. My name is Chris George, and today we have another episode of Table Talk Back, where we take a look at what you, the community, had to say on the previous Table Talks video topic. And if you missed it, I'll put a link to it in the description below. Definitely go check that one out first, because that's what we're going to be using as the jumping off point for our discussion. And this week's topic is the stigma of solo gaming. Why solo gaming? Should games even be allowed to be played solo? Or should you be banned from ever playing games again with other people if you decide that you want to enjoy something that you own? We had a lot of discussion on the topic, so much so that I'm able to put out a response a little bit earlier than usual, which is fantastic. As always, I'll do my best to moderate the discussion, distill the comments into this video, eliminating repeats and condensing things and the like, and that way, to quote a familiar phrase of mine, we can all participate in the conversation. Or, as Ben says, in this solo variant of a group conversation, which I think is hilarious, and also a wonderful place to start with the concept of variants. Now, there was a lot of people who latched onto the idea of the value of including a solo variant in the box. As Kath says, I've slowly found myself checking to see if a game has a good solo option. Games are an escape from the constant pressure of life. If they bring frustration instead of escape, well, they don't get to the table and just sit looking pretty on the shelf. I look for a solo option in games that I think might be AP, analysis paralysis, which will frustrate others at the table. Games that I know my gaming partners will be AP, which will frustrate me, and games that I just really want to play, but will not be interesting to, or too complex, long for those with whom I game. Then there are those times where I don't have the option of electronic media or doing something that will create noise. My husband works from home. My kid homeschools and has Zoom sessions with which no volume can compete. Pulling out a solo game provides a moment of escape before I have to go back to being an adult. And this sentiment is echoed pretty heavily throughout the comments, that the ability to play on your own time and to get games to the table that won't often be played by your normal gaming compatriots is one of the ways that a solo variant can enhance the value of the thing you already own and love. Another point mentioned quite frequently is that it gives you the option to learn the game at your own pace before bringing it to game night and having to stumble through the rules in front of your friends. This is something that's resonating with me more and more as I start to do more and more reviews and get more prototypes sent to me, because this also means I'm going to be relying on my various gaming groups more and more frequently. And if I'm to be efficient and respectful of their time, I need to be able to not have to fumble with the rules every 10 minutes. But if this extra prep time, playing it through by myself first, can be as enjoyable an experience, or even sometimes more enjoyable than playing it with others, that can only be a good thing. And so why not include it in the box if you're able? But what about the question, do solo variants ever detract from the purchasing of a game? Well, Bob has the answer. Though I do think most games are improved with other people, I don't know of any game that is spoiled by a solo mode being present, even if that mode isn't great. So it makes sense to include one when possible. And you might say, Chris, literally no one was asking that question. And I would say, well, yeah, you're pretty much right. But the reason I bring it up is because I have been guilty of thinking just that, just a bit. I remember when I was talking about Velocity Vanguard and when it was finishing up their crowdfunding, and how I wasn't sure if they were throwing everything in there just to throw it in, and if that would detract from the way the game was meant to be played, or if the additions of those modes would increase the price drastically, which is always my major concern. But now I feel, thinking on it, like I've changed my tune. I mean, I guess we do have to factor in that extra development time, but I don't think it'll necessarily add to the cost of a game, because presumably by spending the time to develop these modes, you will attract an audience who are interested in these things. It should pay for itself by all the people who purchased the game because of that solo variant. And usually having an Automa deck or a solo variant components-wise, you're really not adding in that much extra. It comes down to a deck of cards or an extra player mat. So my initial gripes about the extra cost associated with producing these materials, since I'm a penny pinching bozo, won't have nearly as significant impact on the price as I once may have thought. I think we can all certainly agree that it's probably better having it in there than not. Or at least maybe those of us who have a large shelf with unplayed games can agree that having the option of fun is always an enjoyable thought, even if we don't end up capitalizing on them for a long, long time. But what is the general sentiment around solo gaming? And there's a couple of comments that I'd like to share and talk about, because I think there are still two camps that end up forming. The Magi of Dreams says, I find solo gaming very saddening to me. It just looks pointless. If I'm not playing against a human intelligence, it's not gaming. The solo gamers I know don't do it out of preference, but out of necessity due to the lack of interested players. So they have no choice. To me, gaming and social go hand in hand. I'm glad solo gaming exists for those who sadly can't get their gaming itches scratched by human players, but I cannot fathom a person willingly choosing solo gaming over gaming with other people, unless they have social anxiety, etc. In that case, I'm glad solo gaming gives them an outlet. And I love this comment, because I think this is exactly the sort of mindset that this video is meant to address. And I really appreciate this comment because I also think that it's easy to fall into an echo chamber in these sorts of conversations a bit, and not necessarily identify and express particular feelings that may not go with the majority, as is the instance in the previous comment section. And it reminds me a little bit about people who go to restaurants on their own, which I used to think was a sad thing. I think my girlfriend still will comment, oh, it always makes me sad seeing people eating alone. Because the presumption is they had no one to go out with, or people who enjoy seeing a movie in the theater by themselves, which I absolutely could not fathom for a long time. It wasn't until one day I was out and about killing time and I wanted to eat at my favorite restaurant, and one of my favorites, and I had a great book with me, and I went in and I ordered a delicious lunch, had a lovely, relaxing afternoon in between appointments. And it really shifted my perspective on the whole concept, because I wasn't sad. I was in exactly the place that I wanted to be, doing the thing that I wanted to be doing. That certainly doesn't mean there won't be sad people eating alone ever. But I just don't think that the act of eating alone is one that produces sadness. And in fact, it might just be the opposite. And I think the same could be said for board games. Obviously, that's why I'm making the comparison. But at the same time, there is something to be said about sharing a game experience with others. In a comment on a similar theme, Maris Musin said, I'd compare the solo gaming experience to climbing a mountain. It's an exhilarating experience which forces you to independently overcome obstacles using your own ingenuity, etc. But when you reach the peak, it's ultimately a pretty lonely experience, as you don't have anyone to share your triumph with. There's that word again, loneliness. Standing at the peak of the mountain, admiring the stunning view, reflecting on the journey is very uplifting. But when you have someone to share it with, it's much more fulfilling. When I've finally beaten a challenging quest in a solo game, for example, Journeys in Middle-earth, I find myself taking photos of the final board state to try to solidify or crystallize the experience. If I'd been playing with another person, though, we'd discuss and analyze our failures and successes, etc. And I really resonate with this comment a lot, because I'm the type of guy who likes to unpack and analyze and relive the high moments of the game. And when I'm by myself, well, I usually have no problem talking to myself and the many personalities that go along with it. But sometimes even they don't give me the same experience as talking to others. But there are still wonderful ways to develop community, even if that happens to not be around the table. Like Ben says, I got into the hobby when I was living in a town of 300 people and never felt like a 600-kilometer round trip to join a gaming group. Legit. Ever since, I've played the majority of games solo and really enjoy it, and I get my community part of the hobby right here on YouTube. It's a funny way to do it, but it works for me. I love getting involved in the hobby, and playing games solo lets me do it a whole lot more. And I think that is awesome. And this is something that struck me when I first asked that initial question on Reddit, was the community that existed in these chat forums. Of course, there were also two people in the chat who realized they both lived in Arizona and then presumably tried to link up in private messages to see if they both were close to Tucson and maybe get a game together. But I think there are so many avenues where you can connect with like-minded people and share these experiences, that the solo gaming doesn't have to be this insular, lonely thing, but you can branch out and have that community while still partaking in the things you enjoy. And even by accessing that community, it might ultimately be more fulfilling because those people understand what you're up to, perhaps on another level other than someone else. One thing that I've found with starting this YouTube journey is the community aspect is really strong. And I feel like I have a personal connection with many of you whom I've never really met or seen their face. And I found a similar thing when delving into other online communities for other various interests. Or at least I used to have other various interests. But because ultimately that's what they are, community. To shift to a different side of the discussion, Kyle mentions there's a reason old people do their pen and paper puzzles. And I think it's important for anyone's mental health. This hobby is therapy. Painting minis is therapeutic and creative. Setting up a game can require discipline. Learning new rules keeps your mind active. Playing a game changes your ideas and gives you a sense of accomplishment once completed. If you fail, you learn and make adjustments and overcome obstacles. Of course, I don't look at these things in such a strict manner, but it definitely is an underlying factor to the hobby which makes it great. And I wanted to share this part of his comment, well, because it resonated with me and I'm the one making this video. But also, I've also shouted to anyone who will listen about the mental health aspects of the hobby. For me, especially, it has to do with keeping the mind agile and sharp as we plod inevitably closer to the grave day by day. My grandma is 96, and like a lot of people, her memory, especially within recent times, has not been doing very well. And personally, as someone who values my own mental capacities pretty much above anything else, it's a little scary to contemplate happening. Now that's hopefully a long way down the road, but if I can maintain a hobby that also continues to work my mind and continues to help me develop these skills and slows the sense of atrophy that affects us all, well, that's ideal. And if suddenly my gaming groups evaporate, or I just feel like flexing those muscles on my own, it's wonderful to have something that can provide that sense of therapy and that sense of strengthening, and shouldn't be overlooked. That doing it in a solo capacity is probably just as good, or certainly better than a lot of other options. At least for strengthening the mind. That's probably my number one reason to game solo right here, but there are other completely legitimate reasons. For all those introverts out there, as Swill says, introverts, like myself, tend to recharge when by themselves. Extroverts get energy from being around others. Sometimes I want a solo game to relax and recharge and not have to deal with other people and their baggage. Again, I'm strongly introverted, dislike groups, and I'm not ashamed of it. Anyone suggesting I play solo out of desperation doesn't understand that being around others drains my mental energy, and that's completely legit. I don't know if I'm an introvert or an extrovert. I think when I'm outside, once I leave my house and make the decision to leave my house, I'll be out until the last person is done interacting. But it does take me a lot of time to get there. People recharge differently, and people have all sorts of different ways in which they interact. Or sometimes playing solo is just a release for group pressure, like Birdie Gamer says, I am dyslexic, so read slower, and feel bad for holding things up while I read cards. Or I can only enjoy the game so much as I have to ask what other card I should pick, or just pick the simple option just to keep the game moving without employing strategy. That is why I play solo games, which I just like to highlight because I think both of these are also wonderful reasons and completely legit as to why people solo game and why you should try it if you haven't. I'm speaking to myself there. Well, I mean, I have, but I want to get more into it. And it also shies away from the stigma that only people with no friends play games solo, or people who have been locked in the attic by their parents. Although I do have to call out Sharon George, who says, I think most people play solo and with others for games. Personally, I enjoy playing games with others as it is a fun social pastime. Instead of solo games, I prefer knitting. Haha, love the comments about your wonderful parents, who I know did not lock in an attic. Well, Sharon George, interesting last name, for one, seems a little presumptuous to say that you don't know my parents didn't lock me in the attic, since you're certainly someone I've never met and not my mother pretending not to know me in the comments, although that would track as she pretends to not to know me in quite a lot of situations. Although I do remember now, I should print a retraction from the previous video where I said my parents would lock me in the attic, because it is not true. They locked me in the cupboard under the stairs.
You're a wizard, Chrissy.
Well, it certainly did not feel magical to me. Jeffrey says, I haven't been involved in the hobby of board games long, though I've always had a draw to playing games from a young age. Once I began learning about modern board games, I was surprised at the aspect of solo gaming. I was a bit confused why anyone would want to do that, and admittedly I only thought it would appeal to someone who had social anxiety. And then I began to realize that my personal excitement and passion for this new world of games that had recently opened up to me didn't necessarily have the same thrill for everyone else in my personal orbit. And getting games played with others wasn't going to be as easy as I first thought. It was with Village Green that I first took the plunge into a new game solo, and it clicked. Yes, it's the puzzle that I can enjoy without necessarily having to have someone else to enjoy it with. It's kind of like playing solitaire, only much, much better. Then I thought, well, that wasn't so bad. So I tried a few more. Now, I still prefer to play games with other people for the social interaction, competition, and shared experience that playing solo can't provide. Sometimes I just want to play a game and I don't have a partner to play it with. And I think I want to end it on that note. There are lots of reasons to play a game by yourself. There are lots of reasons to play a game with other people. And just like anything else, they're all going to have their own pros and cons. But ultimately, it comes down to feeling passionate about this hobby and having a great time with things that allow you to have a great time. That's really all that matters. I hope maybe these two videos made you want to try a solo game if you never have. I know they certainly did that for me. As someone pointed out, the stigma of solo gaming isn't really that much of a thing anymore. Well, I guess we fixed it. We saved the hobby. We're the heroes of solo gaming. We did it! And while that may not necessarily be true, I think we are in a boom of solo experiences that can only go up from here and become more and more accessible for people to enjoy. And hey, if the stigma still exists, well, it's, as Neil put it, solo board gamers don't care if there's a stigma, as they're too busy playing games and ignoring Reddit. Or Scott's very apt and simple comment, I only play games solo. Who cares? Thanks so much to everyone for participating. Make sure you leave your ideas for the next table talk down in the comments below, as well as any additional discussion that may tickle your fancy. Once again, my name is Chris George. I don't have a catchphrase, but to quote a familiar phrase,
Thanks for watching.
What's this? I've been Shazammed.